Hi, in this video I'm going to quickly talk about what are the differences between JSONRPC and gRPC. So I will talk about the differences and later I'll give a small code snippets to showcase how to implement each of them. So before I talk about JSONRPC and gRPC, let's talk about what exactly is an RPC. RPC stands for Remote Procedure Call. So what it means is that it is a request response protocol initiated by a client, and that sends a request to a remote server to execute some code or some procedure with certain parameters, and then the server responds. So essentially it's a client server thing where you request some computation to a server and the server responds. So in case of JSON RPC, the RPC protocol is encoded using JSON. And in case of gRPC, it is encoded. We use protocol buffers for that, and it uses HTTP2 as transport layer, whereas JSONRPC uses HTTP1. So if we talk about the exact differences, so there are like four aspects we can talk about. So when it comes to serialization format, JSONRPC, as I said, it uses JSON, which is essentially a human readable and text-based format, whereas gRPC uses protocol buffers, which is supposed to be more compact and binary format as opposed to JSON, which is a text-based format. So obviously JSON will be of a little bit of a higher size than protobuf. Then next comes transport protocol. So JSONRPC uses HTTP and gRPC uses HTTP2. So there are several advantages of HTTP2 because it supports things like multiplexing, server push, and efficient for real-time communications. So if you really need performance, then HTTP2 is the way forward. Next comes the actual definition of the service. So in JSONRPC, there is no standardized way or method definition. So it requires manual documentation and agreement. So you kind of have to know what sort of methods are there which a server provides, for example. Whereas in case of gRPC, because we use protocol buffers, I'll come back to this later, how exactly we use it. So because we use protocol buffers, it has like a one standard source of truth where we define all the services, and then anyone can have a look at that service definition and then know what all functionality a server provides. So that is way more efficient, way more user friendly from a developer perspective. If you are actually the developer and coding these things, it's much easier to just have a look at the corresponding .proto file and know what sort of functionalities exist, rather than having to go through the entire code base to know what sort of functionalities exist or have to maintain some sort of documentation. And finally, when it comes to streaming support, so JSONRPC, it has no native support for streaming, whereas in gRPC, it has built-in bidirectional support. Okay, so that's a brief overview of JSONRPC and gRPC and their differences. Now I will go through the exact code in Golang for each of them. So these code are supposed to be like example codes just to show you how to implement them. So let's first go over the JSONRPC. So I have the code for server and client separately. So let's look at server first. So if you are creating a server, essentially what a server does, it provides a service or provides a functionality. So in this case, I'm creating this addition functionality, which takes arguments and gives a response. So here I have this add function, which is implemented by this JSONRPC demo service struct. So this struct service will handle the incoming RPC requests. Okay, so in this function, all I'm doing is just adding these two parameters and returning that. So this is the definition of that functionality, and then the other wiring aspect of the server are written in this main function, where you need to first import this RPC package and this JSON package. So using this RPC package, I'm creating a new RPC server. Then you are doing the registration of that, and then you are doing registration of the service itself. Whereas in my case, this is the JSONRPC demo service struct with the add functionality. So that is getting registered. And then you are doing the HTTP handle where you are setting up this HTTP route. Here I'm defining the route to be /RPC. And then you are doing http.listen and serve, which will start listening on port 1234 in this case. And let's go over the client code. So client will essentially do what? It will request some functionality from the server and get some response. So in this case, I'm creating these arguments. So x is 1, y is 2, and all I want is the addition of that. So as I said before, it uses JSON. So what I'm doing here is JSON marshalling this data. So once you JSON marshal, then you can do a post request to get the response. So here I'm doing the request to this localhost 1234 /RPC, and I'm specifying, okay, this is my method which I want to use, and I have my parameters here. And then I'm getting my response, which I'm decoding into this result map, and I'm simply printing. Okay, so let's first run the server and then we'll run the client. So okay, now the server is running and I will just run the client. Okay, as you can see now, the correct response is being printed here to be 3. So this is a very brief example of how JSONRPC client server code can be written. Now let's go over to gRPC. So gRPC is slightly more involved because, as I said, initially you need to define your functionalities in a .proto file. So here I have this calculator.proto file where you have to define what sort of service you are going to provide. So here I have this service called calculator, and inside this I have this RPC method called add, which takes an add request and returns an add response. So this is typically how you define a .proto file, and here I have this message request and response. And then you essentially need to install protocol buffers, and then you can execute this command to generate some code which are useful to write the server and write the clients. Okay, so once you have written this proto file and you execute this code, in this case my output is Go, so I'm using this Go gRPC plugin. And once you execute this command, you will see these generated files. You don't have to worry too much about it right now. So these two generated code are useful while defining the server and client, and I'll show you the server and client code which use these files. Okay, so let's first look at this server code. So gRPC server. So here, similar to the JSONRPC server, I have this add functionality, add function, and here I'm giving this response, which is addition of these two numbers, the input numbers. And while defining this, to start this server, I have to open a TCP port here, and then I'm creating a gRPC server. I need to import this gRPC package here, and then I'm registering the server, and then I'm listening. So overall idea of the code base remains quite similar to the JSONRPC one. So this is the server code. And once you are running the server, you can write a client to request stuff from the server. So the client code base looks like the following. So here, all you have to do is just open a connection by using grpc.dial. So you connect to the gRPC server, and then you create the client. So here, we didn't have to write all the code to create the client because those code we already generated. So here all you have to do is import that generated file from the path, and then you simply create this client by writing new calculator client. And then all you have to do is call c.add to use this add functionality. And then I'm simply printing the result. Okay. So let's run the code for the server first. So go run. Okay, now the server is running, and now let's run the client. And here you can see you received the correct response. So these are very simple example of how to write a gRPC server client code or how to write a JSONRPC server client code. And generally, if you want like better performance, then you generally go for gRPC using protocol buffers. Whereas if for simpler stuff where you are just doing a single request response type of model, so in that case JSONRPC works just fine. So Just to give an example, like in a real world scenario. So here there's a tweet from Peter, who is like a developer in Ethereum. And in Ethereum, we use JSONRPC format, not gRPC. And it has created some performance issues. So here, as you can see, he has written this tweet: whoever decided that Ethereum should use JSON as its RPC for, should be criticized. So essentially you can see here, because of this encoding decoding related to JSON, it takes longer time than if you didn't have to use that. So if you're using your code at a very high scale where performance is really critical, then probably JSON-RPC is not the right way forward, and you should probably use protocol buffers. Okay, so this is a brief overview of the differences between gRPC and JSON-RPC. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. Thank you.